Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, we have a heavy hitter guest for you. We have Nick Stevens of NTL Trust, one of the most established names in the industry. Nick, how you doing today?
Very well, thanks, Vance. Thank you for having me. Good to be back.
Absolutely honored to finally have you on the podcast. Maybe to kick things off, could you start by telling us a bit about NTL Trust, when and why it was founded, and what makes your firm stand out in the offshore trust and wealth protection space?
Sure, of course. Well, a brief intro to our firm, NTL Trust. So NTL Trust was founded back on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean back in 1994, which was around the time the offshore legislation was first passed on the island of Nevis. So my predecessor was a Canadian who moved to Nevis and decided to set up NTL Trust. And I took over the company in 2011, and I've developed it in two different directions, basically. One is as a trust company and family office provider. So we do trusts, asset protection trusts using Nevis legislation. We also offer LLCs and IBCs and all the related services. Whereas the other arm that we're perhaps better known for these days is citizenship by investment. So we got into the CBI business early on, and we help people with second citizenships across the Caribbean and indeed in several other jurisdictions. But today we're talking about trust, so I've got my hat on from the trust side of the company. I've been working on trust since before I took over NTL Trust, so probably 30 years. And it's been always been an interesting ride, and I've always worked in the offshore trust sector. So onshore trusts exist as well, of course, especially in places like the US, Australia, Canada, UK. They're very popular. A little bit less known in continental Europe, but becoming more popular. And NTL Trust specializes in asset protection trusts. And Nevis is recognized as one of the top two jurisdictions in the world alongside the Cook Islands by the majority of asset protection lawyers. And that's the reason that we principally work with Nevis. We do occasional trusts in other jurisdictions, but Nevis is our speciality.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I forgot to mention at the beginning of the episode, obviously, we're going to do a deep dive into trusts, Nevis Trust specifically, so that the audience can understand them better. We'll learn something together today. And, if people want to execute on this service, if it might be good for them, then Nick and his team can obviously help. So question for you, Nevis has become one of the top jurisdictions for international trusts, as you just mentioned. What first drew your firm to specialize in Nevis specifically, and how has the landscape evolved since the Nevis International Exempt Trust Ordinance was introduced back in 1994?
Yeah, in Nevis, basically I went to Nevis because I was already aware of the ordinance. And as I said, the company was set up in 1994, but I joined it later. I was already working in the trust business. I was setting up quite a few Nevis trusts for people. And then I had the opportunity to take over a trust company on the island. So it seemed like a natural choice. And that's really what attracted me. So I'd been there first before I decided to have my own company. I went to visit other providers that I worked with, other law firms, etc. And then the opportunity came up to acquire an existing trust company on Nevis. So that was really my baptism into running a trust company on Nevis.
Amazing. And I guess we probably need to give a bit more of an understanding of what a Nevis trust is. Maybe how does it differ from trusts in other jurisdictions? And maybe even before that, just the key legal features of a trust and what makes them so strong against lawsuits and creditors.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think before we dive into Nevis trusts, let's just talk about what is a trust, because not all readers will be familiar, and not all listeners will be familiar. A trust is a very flexible instrument, and that's why sometimes it's hard for people to get their head around how it really works, because it's just a legal contract. At the very basis, you and I could set up a trust now. It doesn't even have to be written. I can give you something. I can give you a widget and say, look after this for me. And that's kind of a trust. That's a basic trust. A trust is a contract. It's not a legal entity. In Nevis, our trusts are registered, so they have a certificate of registration, but it's not a legal entity with its own legal personality like a corporation or an LLC. So it's simply a private arrangement between somebody who sets up the trust, who's called the settlor or the grantor, and somebody who is the trustee. And that trustee is then instructed to look after the assets or the corpus of the trust on behalf of another group, which is the beneficiaries. There can be one or more beneficiary. And the beneficiary in a very simple arrangement could be the settlor, but it's more common for the beneficiary to be, for example, the settlor's family. So it could be that you, Vance, would set up a trust. You would pass to us as NTL Trust the title of some assets, and you basically write the rules, and you would say, keep those assets on behalf of my kids, for example. So you could say that you would like the kids to receive the benefit of the trust in terms of a dividend, a regular income, or just the full distribution of capital when they reach the age of 18, 25, 30, whatever you think is appropriate. So basically, when somebody sets up a trust, they are giving away the assets. And that sounds scary to many people because you're giving away the assets. You need to trust somebody, and ultimately that's why it's called a trust. If there is no trust, there is no legal trust. But the law, fortunately, over centuries, because this is law that has evolved according to Anglo-American common law, the law does recognize the rights of the beneficiaries and indeed the settlor, especially the beneficiaries. The law recognizes that there are two types of ownership: beneficial ownership and legal ownership, and that ownership can be separated. So the legal ownership is the title. That might be in my name, but the beneficial ownership might be yours. And if I try to do something which is not in accordance with a trust deed, basically if I try to run off with the assets, the law will support you because you're the beneficial owner. So in a nutshell, that's how a trust works. It's a legal relationship or a contract, and like any other contract, we can write in all kinds of clauses that we would like, and that's really what makes it flexible. So trusts can be set up for all sorts of purposes. Usually there are beneficiaries, but a trust could also be set up to provide, for example, for an animal, for a pet. I've heard of trusts for horses, to look after them after the death of their owner, for example. It could be to look after a beloved pet. And trusts can pay for education, healthcare, or they can pay for public benefits like an art gallery, something like that, a museum. So that's why trusts are used in so many different circumstances. And I should just touch on foundations as well, because I know, for example, you work a lot with Panama, and Panama has foundation law. Sure. The main difference between a trust and a foundation is that the foundation has legal personality. The foundation is a legal entity in its own right, whereas the trust is not. In the trust, the assets are titled in the name of the trustee. and held on behalf of the beneficiaries. So that distinction between beneficial and legal ownership in English law is very important.
Okay.
And then moving on to Nevis. Well, Nevis decided to get into the trust business back in the 1990s, and the laws were drawn up by U.S. lawyers predominantly, who were very familiar with the asset protection requirements in the U.S., and they were specifically trying to design a program that would allow Americans to secure their assets offshore, and basically to put roadblocks in the way of people who are abusing the legal system, because in the US and increasingly in many other countries you can get sued for almost anything, and the awards can be astronomical. So it's not just people in supposedly high risk businesses. I mean, we have a lot of clients who are doctors, dentists, chiropractors, people like that who are constantly scared they're going to be sued. But also just real estate owners, and people who own rental properties, for example, frequently get sued due to accidents in their rental homes, and just any kind of business is pretty much high risk these days. Being in business is high risk, and especially if you're publicly visible and people can see that you have certain assets and you look like you've got deep pockets, then there are contingency fee lawyers who will go after you with no money down. So they create lawsuits out of nothing by going to look for people who might have a chance of a claim. Not necessarily even clients who thought of pursuing a claim, but in any kind of accident, any kind of injury, people will go after the deep pockets. So putting assets offshore is perfectly legal. It's nothing to do with tax in this case. It's not going to make a big difference one way or the other to your tax situation. It's just putting assets in a secure environment with a clear legal mandate and a clear framework, which is designed to protect business people and protect their assets and protect hard-earned income for future generations.
And so what did the American trust writers, what did they come up with? Like what makes it an improvement versus just having a US based trust?
Well, for example, there's a very short statute of limitations, a time in which claims could be submitted. So basically, in the US, it's possible to go back many years and say that assets were fraudulently transferred to a trust in order to avoid creditors. Nevis law will only recognize that going back normally 1 year. So the claim would have to be brought in a Nevis court within 1 year. Obviously, it's better to set this up before you get into any problems. I mean, it's almost like buying insurance. You can't buy good insurance after you've already had the accident. So another big advantage, well, the main advantage is that Nevis doesn't recognize foreign judgments at all. So somebody could go through a foreign court system and obtain a judgment against the assets or the settlor. But if they want to attack a Nevis trust, they have to litigate it in the Nevis courts, and they'd have to start over, hire a Nevis attorney, and Nevis attorneys, they're not cheap and they don't work on contingency fees, so that requires putting down a substantial retainer if you want to bring an action against the Nevis trust. And furthermore, that retainer is not the only money that the person who's suing would need to put down, because then the court will require a bond, which is typically $100,000, and it can go higher, which would cover the legal fees of the other side if the case is lost. So that's a very strong deterrent. Somebody has to have basically deep pockets themselves before they can start a lawsuit against the Nevis Trust. And then, the legislation is very protective of trust assets, whilst being compliant with international standards and whilst being, in tune with the regulatory environment worldwide. Still, another advantage is that all proceedings are held in camera, which means in secret. So any legal proceedings against the Nevis Trust in the Nevis court will be private. They're not available publicly. The public is not allowed to attend the hearings. It's only the parties involved. So those are a number of the main advantages of setting up a Nevis Trust. Plus, of course, it's not really reported anywhere. I mean, we can go later into reporting of bank accounts and things, but the existence of a Nevis Trust is not public knowledge. So for someone even to want to sue a Nevis Trust, first of all, they have to know it exists. And, we encourage and we require that our clients comply with all the reporting requirements in their home countries, but it's not like in the US where you can easily find out how much somebody's net worth is, basically, because there's so much public information out there. With Nevis Trust, there is absolutely no public information. Even the existence of the trust is not public information. So it's very confidential, and it allows people to keep their family business affairs private. And the idea is to put roadblocks which will deter troublemakers who are really just seeking to take advantage of the system and in suing trusts.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty bulletproof, or pretty close to it.
Bulletproof is a word we use a lot in asset protection trusts in Nevis. Yeah.
Good. So let's move on to some practical setup and use cases. I guess, who is the ideal client for a Nevis Trust? Is it high net worth individuals, entrepreneurs? Sounds like you maybe want to do it before you make your money, not after, or a bit of both. Family oriented as well. What types of assets are commonly placed in these trusts? Like, what do you? I'm sure you see a range, but there must be some commonalities to the clients you see walk through the door.
Sure. I mean, one question people often ask is, how much do you need for it to be worth setting up a trust? And that depends. I mean, each case is a bit different. The ideal client is probably a high net worth individual who would like to put substantial assets. I mean, we're talking maybe $1 million, $5 million, $10 million into a trust, and they will typically use that for taking care of future generations, for succession planning, because so many high net worth families these days are international, and there might be children and grandchildren in different countries, and the idea is to provide for them and make sure that the family assets from the original benefactor are passed on as completely as possible. But in fact, we see these days many smaller clients. As you alluded to, it's also useful to set up a trust before you make your money, because we have people who put things like intellectual property. If they're setting up a new business, they can put the trademarks and the know-how and patents and things like that into a trust before it becomes too valuable. Because in many countries, including the US, if you give assets to a trust, it's like giving them away, and you may be taxed. There may be gift tax or estate tax, depending on the country and the jurisdiction, due on gifts to a trust. So, of course, if you set up a trust with little and then it grows, then you avoid some of those taxes legally. So we see people doing that. We also see clients who set up a trust with just a very nominal amount, let's say $100, and then they make the trust the beneficiary of insurance policies. So if anything happens to them, then that's when the trust gets funded by the payout from the insurance policies. And again, the families are taken care of. And so Nevis is a good base for people who have international assets and business and family interests in different countries, because you asked earlier on what's the difference between a domestic trust and an offshore trust. Well, an offshore trust is really an international hub. It can be used to provide for beneficiaries who live in different countries. It can be used to hold assets in different countries. So a trust, of course, can own shares in companies, businesses worldwide. And we see a lot of clients putting their businesses into trust, and the trust becomes a shareholder in an active business. So that's a good use case. We've also seen a lot of crypto investors in Nevis in recent years who put crypto. We've had people put bitcoins into the trust. We've had people put all kinds of other tokens into trusts, and that's absolutely fine too. Another common use case is to hold an LLC, which is used for personal investing. So this is kind of a two-tier structure with a trust and then an LLC.
I was going to ask
underneath.
about this. A Nevis LLC specifically?
Yes, usually it would be a Nevis LLC. That would be the most logical. So we set up a trust, and then the trust owns the LLC. And the LLC offers slightly different protection from the trust, because the LLC is more intended as a commercial entity that can actually go out and do business and issue invoices and things like that. So we see people who, they're running maybe a consulting business, and they can put the consulting LLC, the consulting into the LLC, which is owned by the trust, and then they can move between different jurisdictions and do their invoicing through the LLC. So the LLC also provides another layer of privacy, basically, because it's the people who are doing business with the setup don't even know there's a trust behind it, because they don't know who the owner of the LLC is. They just see who is the manager. And this brings us to another important point, which is who actually controls the trust. And from our point of view in Nevis, the person who's setting up the trust, the settlor, can have all the control he likes. But from a realistic, real-world point of view, that's not a good idea, because the whole point of setting up a trust is to separate yourself from the assets. So generally, it's very important when you first set up a trust to think about the trust deed, because that is the settlor's chance to write the rules. And then the trustee and future trustees and everyone else involved, all the other stakeholders, are required to follow those written rules. So they need to be well thought out, unambiguous, and giving adequate power to the trustee, but not too much power, because later if the settlor comes in and wants to change things, that's going to be difficult. The main asset protection advantage of a trust is that you've genuinely given the assets away to a different legal structure, and you don't have full control over them. Because let's say someone wants to sue a trust, and the settlor has full control, then they can forget about having to go to Nevis and go through all the process that I just mentioned. They can simply sue the settlor and get a judgment, and then the judge will say, well, just wind up this trust and bring the assets back onshore and make the payment, and we'll hold you in contempt of court until you do so. So that's the worst case scenario. It's actually pretty rare that happens, but it certainly has happened. And at that stage, the settlor wants to be able to stand up and say, I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I can't do that because I don't have the power to. I literally gave it away, and I gave it away on certain terms and conditions, but I don't have the power to cancel that gift and to bring the assets back. So that's where it's important to separate control basically to move away from controlling the assets.
Are there any other common misconceptions about Nevis trusts? And how do you ensure everything stays fully compliant with international standards?
Yeah, common misconceptions. I think the commonest misconception is that trusts are used for tax evasion, which historically, maybe back in the 80s or 90s, it was the case that people set up offshore trusts and didn't declare them. But that wouldn't work in today's world because, Big Brother knows everything, and it would be way too risky, and we wouldn't take on board any clients who are not planning to declare their trusts exactly where needed. So a trust doesn't actually make a lot of difference to your tax position. Some people are worried about declaring the trust in their home country, thinking it might raise a red flag. But that's also a misconception because we have lots of clients in many different countries, and it's a completely routine filing. It's never, to my knowledge, triggered audits, the mere fact that you have an offshore trust. So I would say those are the two commonest misconceptions: tax evasion and offshore planning. So illegal offshore planning. So you asked how we make sure that people comply. Well, first of all, we're subject to strict KYC procedures, of course, and Nevis is a reputable jurisdiction, and its reputation, I think, is improving. It's not one of the most famous international financial centers. I mean, BVI and Cayman, for example, are a lot bigger. But Nevis has never had any major scandals. Unfortunately, in Panama, we had the Panama Papers. In many other jurisdictions, there have been international scandals because things weren't done properly. Whereas Nevis has always been small, well-regulated, but not over-regulated. And we all complain about the way the world's going and too much compliance, but too much bureaucracy. It's a common refrain that I hear all around the world when I travel to meet clients. But Nevis is not overly bureaucratic. It's easy to do business. It's welcoming. It encourages investors and encourages people who want to set up trusts. So it's a well-regulated jurisdiction, and for that reason, we do require, all the basic KYC checks, sanctions checks, references, proof of the source of funds. We run some pretty in-depth checks on that. So, and we also have a responsibility to the settlers to help them with reporting. So, we're not an accountancy firm, obviously, but we often work with outside accountants and auditors to use the financial statements, and preferably we work with the people, the clients' onshore advisors. We can work hand in glove with them and manage the assets so that the onshore advisors have a clear understanding and make sure that everything's compliant in the country of residence, or indeed the countries of residence, because many of our clients have multiple citizenships and residencies.
Right. I guess my thought would be, how bespoke of a product is this? Is this something that you can sort of take off the shelf for anybody almost, or do you really have to look at a client's kind of holistic picture and then customize it for that individual?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, yes, it's bespoke, but of course we have a standard trust deed that we have 2 or 3 standard trust deeds, one for beneficiaries, one for purpose trusts without beneficiaries, etc. And then we tailor them. And we absolutely always have tailored them to the client's needs, and we help to put in assets. We help to manage the beneficiaries. We consult the clients on what should happen to the beneficiaries based on certain life events, what will happen to the assets. So it's always been bespoke in that way, but now I see it's becoming more bespoke, and we've noticed a big change in the last year or so with AI, and every AI makes everybody feel they're an expert on everything. So we've been seeing a lot more requests from clients to customize their trust deeds, and this is something we've had to adapt to. So before I would say that we did a minimum, perhaps 10% amount of 10% of the trust deed was customized, and the rest was standard. Whereas now we're seeing all kinds of revisions and clauses that the clients are asking for, and they're actually becoming better educated on the topic, and I think that's good. It's more work for us, but I think generally it's a good development, and it's the way the world is going. So yes, trust deeds are becoming more and more bespoke, and I think that's a good thing.
Right, that makes sense. They'll just run it through their AI and stuff. But a
Yeah.
lot of this stuff isn't online, so it's not the easiest thing to find information on, which is why we appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's not the easiest thing to find information on, and there's a lot of unreliable information out there on the internet, as with many other topics. But there's all kinds of people who are trying to sell offshore trusts, and some of them are better than others, and some of them have completely erroneous or out of date information on their websites, and that those myths get perpetuated. So you're right, it's not easy to find the information. And that's why it is good to sit down with a company such as ours and to get on a call with us, and we'll look at your individual circumstances. It is something that we offer. Especially, we'd be happy to extend that offer to My Latin Life clients if they would like to get on a discovery call and find out how to personalize their own trusts.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see things going over the next 5-10 years in the trust industry in general, and maybe Nevis as well? Because just you see it the same as I do. There's just a huge uptick in interest in global mobility in general. Of course, we have digital assets, and things are just getting more globalized. I mean, it's incredible that you were doing this before the internet. Um, I think, post 2020, we've seen a huge surge in popularity for things like this. Where do you kind of see things going?
That's a very interesting question. The industry in general, I see it, as you said, there's more and more demand for this, for global mobility, and that mobility applies not just to individuals, but also to their assets. And the more mobile individuals are, the more it makes sense to have an offshore tax neutral base. I mean, tax neutral, and that I didn't even mention that Nevis trusts are not subject to any tax whatsoever on the island of Nevis. So, of course, you may be taxed in your countries of residence, but if people are moving around, living in 3, 4, 5 different countries during their careers, or even during a short period, then it makes more and more sense to use an offshore trust. So I think the industry in general will probably consolidate. I mean, there have been a lot of small trust operations, and I think I'd expect to see bigger companies developing, and I think we're already seeing that with companies that offer different jurisdictions. But that's not necessarily a good thing, because it is very good to have somebody who fully understands the jurisdiction they're working with, and that's not necessarily the case. Let's say you go to an office in, say, Switzerland, and you're buying a Nevis trust. Maybe you're not really talking to somebody who's an expert on Nevis. So the internet, of course, has made it easier to work direct with the source, and that's something that we're accustomed to. We work remotely with our clients. Whereas back in the days before the internet, probably the client would have been referred by the lawyer in their home country, or in a wealth management center like Switzerland or London, and we would have been working with that professional. So another trend in the industry is going direct to source, shall we say, cutting out the
Right.
middleman.
Yeah, you do a good
And
job with that. I mean, you have good SEO and stuff.
oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, we have a good SEO team, and we work full time. We have people working full time on keeping our SEO and website active, and most importantly, we make sure we put good information on the website.
Hmm.
We make sure that we have accurate information, so anyone is welcome to take a look at our website. And you won't find a lot of trust information there, but what you will find is reliable and accurate. So those would be the industry trends, and I think I think in some ways we're seeing globalization under a lot of threat. Uh, there's there's global mobility on the one hand, but there's also more and more borders being put up, walls being put up, both literally and figuratively. Trading blocks under threat. So it's going to be perhaps harder in the future to actually to take assets offshore, and I think this is something. Even in the short term, we're seeing so much economic instability now, and capital controls have been
Right.
in place in living memory in many places, and they could easily be introduced again. And there are also capital controls by the back door, which I think is the case with many of the anti-money laundering controls we see. It's getting harder and harder to just wire your assets offshore.
Right.
And then there are precious metals, which is something everybody's thinking about at the moment with the prices of gold and silver. And we've always had some trust clients who keep precious metals in their trusts, and they're also, there could be new restrictions, because I think we're going to see a decoupling of paper gold and physical gold. So I think there will be new restrictions, new capital controls all around, and maybe now is the time to get your assets into an international trust before it's too late.
Betting. That's good. You know what my backup plan is? I might just
Tell me.
become a Nevis lawyer. It sounds like a high-paying job. If all else fails, I'm going to become a Nevis lawyer.
That sounds like a plan. So we can get you set up with citizenship in Nevis, which you'll probably need first.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
and then
Should be a good
uh,
investment.
yes.
Okay,
Now
cool. No, seriously though, I imagine most people, this isn't an all or nothing thing, right? You could do this with, say, 10% of your assets, half your assets, 80% of your assets. How do you think about sort of right sizing this relative to someone's portfolio?
that's another good question. I would say, of course, it's not all or nothing. I think it would be good to put all one's international assets into the trust. Because even once the assets are in the trust, you don't have to keep them all in the same place or even the same type of asset. You can have a bit of some digital assets, some physical assets, some stocks, some bank accounts. You can have all those in the trust. What gets complicated is when people try to put onshore assets. I mean, you can certainly put some real estate into the trust, but it depends a lot on the local laws of the country where the real estate is located. And I've even had people wanting to put cars and yachts and things into trusts, and that's where it gets a bit complicated. So, let's say you have a portfolio of rental properties in your home country. It's probably not worth trying to put those properties directly into the trust. It would be complicated, and at the end of the day, well, the properties are still in that country and in under the jurisdiction of that country's laws. But any kind of mobile assets like digital assets, bankable assets, stocks, funds, etc., can be put into the trust. And I would say, if you're setting up the trust anyway, you've got certain fixed costs. Why not take advantage of it and move your bankable assets into the trust?
And of course, it's a cost benefit analysis based on the costs associated with the setup and the running of the trust. But I was just curious. Let's just say that there was zero cost to a trust setup. just for the sake of argument, shouldn't everybody be doing this, at least with the percentage of their assets, if there was no carrying cost? Like, shouldn't, like, if you could get the, marginal cost of having a trust, offshore trust, to zero, like, shouldn't everybody probably do it then?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think everybody should consider that. It depends it depends on having assets, of course. I mean, these days, lots of
Yeah.
people are in debt. Lots of people are, negative. Um, but if people who have the assets, they should definitely it can't do any harm to put them into a trust. The only possible downside I could see is for people who live in countries where trusts are not recognized, because
Right.
trusts, as I said earlier, an Anglo-American common law thing. They most of the major countries these days recognize trusts one way or another, but traditional civil law countries, for example, in Latin America, often don't fully recognize common law trusts. So there it could get a bit problematic, if you have all your life in one South American country, for example, and then you want to put some of your assets um, into an international trust. You can't do that with the domestic assets. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, makes sense. So definitely a lot further the discussion could go, but we only have limited time here for today. I think, this really lines up well with everything we talk about in terms of flag theory, in terms of creating a little bit of jurisdictional arbitrage, right?
Exactly.
Creating a little layer of safety there. And that's something I can definitely get on board with.
Yeah, going back to flag theory, that's something I've been following for many years, and absolutely, a trust is one of the flags. It's basically the asset haven and the place where your assets can be managed safely. And we didn't even get into banking. That might be something for another podcast. But just to say that the trust can, of course, open bank accounts all around the world. So again, you're not restricted to local Nevis banks.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that when we talked about the LLC stuff a bit, but do you want to take a minute and just elaborate a bit on what banking might look like?
Yeah, banking depends in a nutshell on the client's requirements. So the easiest kind of bank account to open is one for investments. Could be a brokerage come bank account, where people will just keep their assets and manage their assets. And we have relationships with some very good banks in different parts of the world, like Switzerland, Bahamas, Panama, places like that, which will open accounts for Nevis trusts. We do also help clients. Some clients need more transactional banking if they're doing business through the LLC, doing business internationally, invoicing some services or buying and selling goods which ship internationally. So we also have some clients in those kinds of businesses who need more active accounts, and we do have solutions for them.
Amazing. Well, I think let's get to wrapping up the episode. Be respectful of your time. There was going to be, of course, a link in the description where people can get to your website, to your contact page. They'll be able to, mention My Latin Life. But as we get to wrapping up, Nick, any final message that you want to share with the audience, or anything you feel like we didn't cover?
Just at the risk of stating the obvious, we live in very turbulent times, and Plan B and Plan C and Plan D are all essential. And I think flag theory has never been more relevant than it is now. I think having an offshore trust as part of your flag theory, alongside citizenship, residence, banking, etc., is essential for any global entrepreneur.
Couldn't agree more. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, our guest today, Nick Stevens from NTL Trust. Link in the description to get in touch with them. You can mention My Latin Life as well, and they'll treat you super nice. Let them know that you came from the podcast. Another way to get to Nick and his team If you book a call with My Latin Life, there's also a consultation link to our calendar in the description as well. You can book a call with us. We can look at your holistic situation, and I can get you directly in touch with Nick that way. So 2 ways to win. And I guess that's it for today. Please subscribe to the podcast as well. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this. Please follow. We put out 2 episodes a week with amazing guests like Nick. You won't want to miss an episode. Ciao for now.
Thank you, Vance. All the best.